Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Wolfson, the host and founder of Web3 Deep Dive Podcast. Web3 Deep Dive Podcast focuses on real-world Web3 use cases to help you better understand how Web3 is being applied today and how it may be leveraged in the future. If this sounds interesting, I encourage you to subscribe, like, and share the content that you're seeing today to help spread the word about Web3. I'd also like to take the time to thank Web3 Deep Dive sponsors. Animoca Brands is sponsoring today's episode. As a worldwide industry leader in digital entertainment, blockchain, and digital property rights, Animoca Brands plays a key role in the future growth of Web3 and the open metaverse. With a portfolio of over 450 investments in products like the Sandbox, Phantom Galaxies, Life Beyond, and Mochaverse, Animoca Brands will keep building a better and fairer Web3 ecosystem, bringing true digital property rights to all internet users. I'm so excited for today's guest. Today I'll be speaking with Paul Brody. He's the global blockchain leader for Ernst Young. We're going to be speaking all about his new book, Ethereum for Business, and what Ethereum for Enterprise Adoption means. Let's get straight to today's episode.
Thank you so much for having me. Rachel, I was delighted to answer your summons because I don't think anybody has covered blockchain, especially enterprise and public blockchain the way you have. I think, a lot of people read all the press releases for a long time and they just sort of took large companies at their word that like private blockchain was a thing and it was going to work out. And I really feel like you saw through that way before anybody else in the press did. So I will always be grateful.
Oh, well, thank you, Paul. That's wonderful. It means a lot to me. And it also means a lot to me that you're joining me here in San Francisco today for Web3 Deep Dive Podcast.
Yes. One of my favorite cities. I've been here for 20 years, raised my family here. So, and hopefully the city's had a rough spot. We're hitting bottom before everybody else. I don't think we have unique problems, but I hope we solve them.
Yeah, right. And I mean, we were just discussing, it looks like San Francisco is becoming, a bit cleaner. And so it seems like there's a lot of improvements happening. So I'm excited to be back in San Francisco. It's one of my favorite cities also.
Awesome. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, well, thank you. So let's get started. So Paul, I introduced you as the global blockchain leader at Ernst Young, or EY. Could you just kind of explain what your role is there and talk about what you're doing with EY and blockchain?
Yeah, fantastic. So I have a really amazing job at EY. I mean, basically, I joined EY about 8.5 years ago after building the first blockchain at IBM. And to be honest, I went down this blockchain rabbit hole, especially Ethereum. I met Vitalik, and we were working on this Ethereum-related project, which was called Adept, Autonomous Decentralized Peer-to-Peer Telemetry. And it was an IoT blockchain project. And it was tested and deployed by Samsung just as a prototype. But once I'd gotten down this path, I was like, wow, this is what I want to do. This is transformational. It's where I want to go and spend a big chunk of my time, really make my job around this. And at the time, IBM just wasn't enthusiastic about that. So I started looking for a new place to do this. And EY was starting to get into the blockchain space, especially with cryptocurrency related audit clients. So they're like, well, we need technical skills. I went on to EY, and within about 6 months, I persuaded EY that crypto and blockchain are not just interesting things that we should understand a bit about. They're transformational things. They will transform all business, and we need to make it a proper part of our business. And that's how I kind of got started and got into this role.
Mm-hmm. Right. So blockchain is a part of all businesses, is kind of what you're saying.
It's going to revolutionize. If you were to boil everything down that I sort of believe to one sentence, it would be this. I believe that blockchains will do for networks of enterprises what ERP did inside the enterprise. Mm-hmm. Now, let me unpack that a little bit because there's a whole bunch of things there. So ERP, for those people who don't know, enterprise resource planning, it was the thing that basically large companies spent most of the 90s and the first part of this century, first decade of this century implementing. And it's the stuff that sort of stitches everything inside of a company together, right? It's when if you go to a supermarket and you pull some food off the shelf, it registers in the sales system that you got money, but also it says the inventory is now down 1 and I maybe need to reorder more. It's this thing that makes across an enterprise common process, common data, and integration. All that cool stuff that enterprises spent about 20 years implementing, it like falls apart instantly the minute you leave the enterprise. So inside the enterprise, common process, common data, standardization. Outside the enterprise, they're still like faxing each other. Their email. My favorite is when people email each other a PDF. That's not digital integration. And what I realized is blockchain is the tool that will knit all these business ecosystems together, and it will do it without, because it's public and decentralized, it will do it without favoring one company over another. So it will be a fair, safe, and secure system for that transformation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So blockchain will knit all of these ecosystems together.
Yeah.
Let's back up a little bit just because I want our listeners to understand how blockchain can be used for enterprises. So maybe give us a real world example, maybe even explain blockchain a little bit more because, you know, it's a term, it's a buzzword, but what is blockchain technology?
Yeah, so great questions, which I love answering. So let's take it from the standpoint of a typical business problem, right? Basically, all business relationships pretty much boil down to I have money and you have stuff, and I would like to exchange my money for your stuff. Now, in financial markets, the my money for your stuff is just a swap, right? There's no detailed contracts or anything. If you buy stock on Wall Street, there's a market price. You pay the market price, you get the stock. It's very simple. That's a swap. Most businesses don't operate like that. If you think about your smartphone or these microphones or any of the stuff that you're using, most of the time what happens is a company buys key components or services from a specialized supplier. And they make a strategic decision. I'm going to partner with this company. I'm going to use their product. They're going to make a customized version for me. And so it's money for stuff under the terms of a special agreement, which usually means I promise to make my best available for you. I promise to give you a discount when you hit a certain threshold. Those agreements are complicated to set up and administer. And in particular, what happens is, you know, my money for your stuff. Well, I need to keep track of how much of the stuff you're sending me. And I need to keep track of the terms of our agreement. And today, all of these things are in different places. Like the stuff part of the equation, that's all inside these ERP systems. The money is all separate. It's all in banks. And the agreements are all a bunch of, digital agreements are all a bunch of PDF files, you know, in Dropbox folder somewhere. It's all separate. And so if you want to do anything between companies, a lot of what happens is reconciliation, right? I buy something from you, you send it to me, and then you send me an invoice, and then I'll ask somebody in accounts payable, say, okay, I want you to make sure that what Rachel sent me is what I ordered, and I want you to check the agreement to make sure that it's the price that we agreed. All of that is very complicated. On a blockchain, I can turn those things into all digital parts. So the money and the stuff can be represented as digital tokens. And the agreement can be represented as a smart contract. And then these things can sort of automatically keep track of themselves. Mm-hmm. So when you send me an invoice, the smart contract looks at it and says, I know how much Rachel's given me. I know what we agreed to. I know how much you've already paid. And this is how much she's owed. And then it's done automatically. And that's really transformational. And blockchains provide this very simple mechanism with tokens and smart contracts and wallets for us to represent all the really important parts of the business relationship.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's a good way of breaking it down, especially for people who are already familiar with blockchain. So basically, a company can tokenize assets, put that digital token on a blockchain network, and then everything is kind of transparent and automated from there.
Yes, mostly that's true. So there's a couple of really good, I always tell people there's 3 things to know about blockchains, and there's 3 components that we talked about. So the 3 components that we talked about are tokens, smart contracts, and wallets. Wallet's kind of a company's account. A token is the item of value, whether it's money or stuff, mm-hmm. and the wallet is and the smart contract are the business terms that we agree to.
Okay.
Blockchains themselves have 3 kind of underlying functions that are worth understanding. The first is this concept of the distributed ledger. So every financial system has a ledger, right? It's just a list of all the stuff that goes in it. What's special about blockchains is it's often called a distributed ledger because everybody gets a copy. So if you take something like Ethereum or Bitcoin, there are literally 10,000 or more full copies of each of these ledgers all around the world. Everyone's got their own copy. Well, that's kind of cool, actually, because it makes fraud really hard. Like, I can tamper with my version of the ledger, but now I'm kind of visibly out of step with everybody else. So when people say blockchains are tamper-proof, that's what they're talking about. It's really impractical to cheat when everybody's got 10,000 copies. That's one thing, is a distributed ledger. The second key concept, and this is where blockchains are so different from every other system that sort of human beings have built in the past, is, and you don't hear this term as much these days, but the programmable ledger, right? Blockchains contain not just little entries as ledgers. They don't just contain little entries of like who gave what to whom and from and to. That we can also put business agreements and rules in them. And this is what makes them programmable. And this is why we can do cool stuff like not just have money as a token, but we can basically treat inventory, assets, services, hours, anything you want, we can sort of treat almost like money. And so it's the programmable ledger. And then the third thing is this mechanism we have for getting everybody to agree, because it's no good if my copy of the ledger is completely different than yours. And that's called the consensus algorithm. And it's basically a set of tools, and they come in various flavors, but basically it's how we agree. It's a set of mathematical tools that make sure that over time, my copy of the ledger looks exactly like yours. And if for whatever reason I end up with a slightly different version, I get corrected so that everybody has an absolutely identical copy.
Right. So there are lots of benefits when it comes to blockchain for business.
Yes.
But let's get a little bit more specific here, because you know that I've been in the industry since 2017. And when I entered the industry, private blockchains were the thing for enterprise. And not a lot of enterprises were using public blockchains. But you just wrote this book, Ethereum for Business. Ethereum is a public blockchain. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between private and public blockchains and why Ethereum may be the blockchain that's best suited for business.
So my favorite questions. You're teeing up great questions, and these are awesome. And I know you've read some of the book, so thank you for doing that.
It's a very good book, by the way.
And we should talk a little bit about the book towards the end, but you're teeing up the big question. So the first one to me always seemed kind of obvious. There's no point in having a centrally managed, decentralized ledger. And this idea behind private blockchains, I think it emerged from a couple of different things. One of the reasons why people got excited about private blockchains is if you understand how blockchains work, you also understand that by default, public blockchains, any blockchain doesn't have privacy. The only way that the consensus algorithm is basically this process where I'm checking you and you're checking me and we're all checking each other. Well, that doesn't work unless we can all see each other's numbers. It doesn't work if everything's a secret. So that is, people had to figure out, how do we get privacy into this system that seems really cool? Because most companies really won't do anything without privacy. They just won't. And so private blockchains were an effort to enable some level of privacy. Private blockchains allow you to secure your blockchain from public eyes. Now, if there's 10 companies in a private blockchain, they can still all see each other's stuff. And this is actually one of the fatal flaws of private blockchains, is they don't provide enough privacy and they don't provide any decentralization. And a big part of the value of blockchain is true decentralization, the fact that nobody controls it. Unfortunately, or maybe just kind of instinctively, large companies, their first thought is like, I want to control this. I want to control my destiny. I want to control the system. And I'm more comfortable controlling a blockchain that I own than participating in an open, public, fully decentralized system. Unfortunately, everybody had the same idea, right? It's almost like a farce. Like at one point we did a survey. For every one company that was willing to join somebody else's blockchain, 2 companies started their own. That's not a recipe for any kind of like critical mass or adoption or anything. So in the end, private blockchains don't work, A, because they don't really solve the privacy problem, and B, nobody really wants to join somebody else's private blockchain. And almost every private blockchain effort has basically flopped.
Mm-hmm. Are private blockchains even necessary in your opinion? I mean, what are they? I guess if 10 people are joining this private blockchain network, what are they achieving versus the other option, I guess?
This is the other thing I really have a hard time wrapping my head around. Like, if the 10 companies here could all agree to get some third party to run a private blockchain for them, they could also just get a third party to run a server for them. And by the way, whatever you can do on a server, whatever you can do in a blockchain, you can do much better, faster, and cheaper in a centralized system. The only thing that blockchain is really, really essential for, that it's visionary and valuable for, is decentralization. That's the only real, I think, fundamental value proposition. Everything else you can take away. But the one thing that blockchain has is this essentially this guarantee that you will not wake up in the morning and discover that your business is completely at the mercenary of some digital future monopolist.
Mm-hmm. Can you give an example, a real world, because you have a ton of examples in the book because I've been reading it. Can you just tell our listeners an example of Ethereum for business?
Yes. So I'll give you a couple of my favorites. One of the ones that I really love the most is something simple like inventory management. So large companies, you think about any kind of process where you buy stuff, it's been assembled over many, many steps, right? Basically, things start as dirt and they end up as smartphones. Well, that means managing diodes, CRT, displays, batteries, CPUs, assembly, right? This process goes all the way back from the customer, and it's very complicated, and it's really hard to match up all the items. With inventory management, if I could represent each chip, each screen, each battery as a digital token, and if I could see where exactly they are at my supplier, in the warehouse, at the original manufacturer, I could see what the flow looks like, and I could manage my supply chain with much more efficiency and much lower cost. And I could do it in a way that works for everybody. So inventory management, we believe, for example, will be one of the big killer applications, especially now that we're starting to get good at managing privacy, privacy-enabling technology on public chains. Nobody wants to share what they're buying, where it is, etc. But that's one huge value proposition, is the ability to keep track of your stuff. And then you can do really cool things with it, like you can run your business with less inventory. But we also have clients who are doing things like, we have a ton of clients who are doing food traceability, right? You can recall food if there's been an illness. If you open up almost any bottle of Peroni beer in Italy, you can scan the QR code on the front of the bottle. Actually, I think it's any bottle of Peroni anywhere in the world. There's a QR code on the front. It will take you to a web page where blockchain data done by EY for Peroni will show you what farm the organic ingredients for your beer came from.
Oh, wow. So is Peroni, so you guys are working with Peroni then?
We're working with Peroni. We're working with a sake maker in Japan. Another one that I'm really proud of is a really large news agency. We're doing 1 million articles a year for them, where you can make sure that the article that you're reading hasn't been tampered with.
Wow. And that's really useful now, especially with fake news and AI.
And we're ramping up on a new election cycle. It's going to be, I think actually there's going to be a lot more demand.
Yeah. Okay. So EY has clients that they're helping with blockchain for business. Are all of them using Ethereum blockchain?
Almost all. Not all of them, but almost all. So we made a couple of really important decisions. And this gets to this question of like, why Ethereum, right? And so why public blockchains for me is easy, right? The value proposition of blockchain is decentralized, and only public blockchains are properly decentralized. We then get to the second question, which is like, okay, what are you going to do? And the typical path of almost every large consulting or professional services firm is to say, listen, we're technology agnostic. You come to us with a problem and we'll kind of work with you however you want to go.
Right.
And it's an admirable trait, but it comes with some baggage. And in particular, it's particularly tough when you have to think about, how am I really going to help you, right? All of these different blockchains are different, and they require different skills. And so when I looked at my investment budget from EY, and I looked around the market and said, I have to make a choice. I can be okay at like 10 different blockchains, or I can be awesome at one. And so we made a tough strategic decision let's be awesome at one. And we made that decision for a couple of reasons. Number one, Ethereum is by far the largest, and has been for the longest time, is by far the largest programmable blockchain. Bitcoin is cool, but you can't make applications like inventory management on it. So Ethereum is by far the biggest one. So if we're going to be number one at anything, and we want to be the best at something, we should be the best in the biggest market. That's the first easy decision. The second really, really important decision is, how do we believe the market will evolve? And this is one of these like interesting things. Like, there's a piece of conventional wisdom out there. You ask somebody like, what does the future look like for blockchain? They're like, oh, we're going to live in a multi-chain future. What makes you believe? What is the evidence that supports that idea? We don't live in a multi-database world, right? We don't live in a multi-network world. Windows is like 85% of all PCs. Android is like 80% of all smartphones. We live, the characteristics of our world is that we almost always have a single dominant platform, and usually maybe one smaller kind of specialized platform. But that's pretty much it. Well, Ethereum's the biggest, and I don't believe that we're going to have a multi-chain future. So then it starts to become an easy decision about where you're going to focus your energy and what you're going to do.
Is it challenging to work with enterprises and businesses and convince them to implement blockchain, to convince them that they need blockchain? And also with the, with everything in the world that's happening right now in the crypto industry, crypto and blockchain get mixed up, and people think of crypto with blockchain and then they think of FTX. That could create even more challenges.
And it has. It absolutely has. Like, we have clients who've come to us and said, listen, our interest hasn't diminished, but politically, this isn't the time where we can push forward a big blockchain initiative, especially a public blockchain initiative. And it reminds me so much, I'm embarrassed to say how old I am, but it reminds me so much of the early days of the internet. I was an entry-level consultant. We saw a lot of this nervousness, like, hey, there's bad things that happen on the internet. Do we want to put our business there? And I think what happens is people think that they will be sort of condemned by association with an ecosystem that's not all good or has a lot of fraud in it and so on. We got past that with the internet. I believe we will get past that with blockchain. What is really hard with enterprises is they make decisions much more slowly. In my house, I'm the CFO, right? I'm the co-CEO. I'm not the general counsel because I married a lawyer. But I can make decisions really quickly. I see a button, I see that like 50,000 word terms and conditions. I just click OK.
Yeah.
That's not how it works in enterprise. It's like they convene a committee and they read all the 50,000 words and then they want to negotiate them. Enterprise, like on average, new technologies go through consumers in like less than a decade. Enterprises, it takes 20, 25, sometimes 30 years to go through a whole tech cycle. We're still using, just to give a sense, large companies, the people who make your smartphone, they're still running their supply chain, a big chunk of it, with a technology. So I was personally involved in the implementation of the planning software in the mid-90s, okay, which, again, scarily dates me. And they, in the mid-90s and still today, are using a business-to-business messaging technology called EDI that dates from the early 1970s.
Oh, wow.
I mean, the age of the infrastructure in large enterprises is really, really long. Now, that means, if you're paying attention, it's a gold mine forever, right? But it also makes time. It takes so much time to get companies in these cycles because they don't replace stuff just because it's new and shiny. They replace stuff because there's an ROI, and probably the thing that's doing it now is hopelessly broken.
Got it. So is it safe to say that companies that are entering the blockchain space now are still very early, but they may get ahead in the end for being an early adopter?
Yes, I think there's two or three kinds of payoff, right? And again, I'm a huge fan of the history of technology. Maybe it's because I've lived through plenty of it, but I believe there's so many lessons to be learned. And go back to Web 2, right? We didn't have quite the growth in Web 2 that we thought we were going to have. It took a couple of decades for Web 2 to get where we thought it would take, like in like 5 years. That's normal. It takes a lot of time for enterprises to grow, and grow into things and make changes. Think about like the early days of e-commerce. It was easy to set up a website, but believe it or not, and you could even order things online, but most companies' online catalogs didn't have photos. the whole infrastructure system, warehousing, shipping, everything, it was literally easier to order a pallet of something like, a cargo truck full than it was to order a single unit. Right? The whole infrastructure had to be sort of adjusted over time to scale up to support e-commerce. Same thing happening now with blockchain. So for the companies that are going to get in early, there's absolutely payoff. We have such great data. Like for the work we did with Microsoft, 99% reduction in cycle time, 40% reduction in cost, right? Blockchains work well for enterprises. But more importantly, think about the big companies that were successful early on in their transition to Web 2, that started to put their catalogs online and things like that. The winners early in a digital market ecosystem are astonishingly hard to dislodge, like really, really hard, right? Think about where, if you bought a copy of this book, and I hope you did, not you because I brought you on, but imagine you buy a copy of this book. You know which online retailer you bought it from. That's been the biggest online retailer for books for like 25 years.
Right.
So you can't tell me that no one's figured out potentially a better way to do it in 25 years. But what's remarkable is how incredibly well entrenched early market leaders can become, and how bad large companies are, especially at understanding the size of the opportunity that's at stake.
Mm-hmm. Got it. I want to shift gears a little bit because you said something interesting previously that I wanted to ask you about. You said that it's possible to, or you said something like this, include privacy within public blockchains. And I know EY is doing a lot to implement solutions there. So I want you to talk a little bit about what those solutions are and how that works.
Yeah, so this is such an important topic, because if there is a single thing that's holding back the world from doing more business on Ethereum, it's a lack of privacy. Mm-hmm. And foundationally, right, blockchains depend on everybody checking each other. So conceptually, privacy is fundamentally adverse to that. In order to make that work, we basically have to do a bunch of like fancy math to make it possible for a blockchain to have some level of privacy. And effectively what happens is you use a type of math called a zero knowledge proof. And these break my brain. And honestly, like, I used to think I was good at math. It turns out not even remotely close to good enough. But zero knowledge proofs are really incredible, because what they do is they say, I'm not going to show you the actual data, but I'm going to show you a mathematical proof that what I'm saying is true, so that you don't have to just sort of trust me. Now, I can't explain to you in detail how this works, but I can give you one example, which I think is always amazing. Let's say that you are colorblind. So if I have a red ball and a green ball, I should buy a red ball and green ball so I can do this for real. But let's have a red ball and green ball, and you say you're colorblind. They look exactly the same to you. So I will prove that these are different. I'll give them to you, and what is it? You put them behind your back, and you can either swap them around or not. And every time you do that, you'll come back and I'll tell you, oh, you swapped the balls, or you didn't swap the balls, right? The green's on the right and the blue, the red's on the left. And after you do that 2 or 3 times, I will have statistically proven to you that, in fact, these are 2 different color balls. Even though you can't see the difference because you're colorblind, I can see the difference. Mm-hmm. So I've proven to you something that's true. And what's amazing about this is when we're done, you will know I'm telling the truth. You still won't know which one's red and which one's green.
Okay, I see. So there's still that privacy there.
Yeah.
But you know that one is red and one is green.
You will know that I'm telling the truth about what I said, even though you still can't tell which one is which.
Right.
And so that's kind of the conceptual example of how a zero knowledge proof works.
Right. And then I also had Evan Shapiro of Mina Protocol on the show during Consensus, and they're doing zero knowledge proofs, and so he explained it as well.
Did he use the Where's Waldo example?
I don't think so. He's highly technical, but he did use some examples. I don't want to say them because I can't, say them as well as him or as well as you, because it's extremely complicated. But that's needed in Ethereum to ensure privacy.
It is, and it's amazing to me. And again, I feel sort of inadequate because I can't understand how it all works. But we can actually do three really interesting things with zero knowledge proofs. The first is scalability. We can take a bunch of transactions and summarize them together. And so you'll see people, lots of people, not EY, but lots of other people are using zero knowledge proofs to increase the capacity of Ethereum in these layer 2s. Secondly, we can use zero knowledge proofs to keep simple things like private like transfers. I've given something to you, or I gave it to somebody else. Thirdly, and this is the one that I really think is amazing, is we can also use zero knowledge proof mathematics to encapsulate business logic. And so if you come back to this thing of like, I've got money and you've got stuff, and we're exchanging my money for your stuff under the terms of an agreement, we need two kinds of privacy. One kind is a transfer of money and stuff, right? I don't want anybody else to be able to see how much I paid for how many widgets, right? Or how many widgets I bought or anything like that. But secondly, even if they couldn't see that, if they could read the terms of our agreement, they would already know a ton, right? If it says I get a discount after a million widgets, like, he's planning on buying more than 1 million widgets, and wow, that's an incredibly good price, right? So in those circumstances, we need to have also the business logic made private as well. So what we ended up doing, and we've been working on this for about 7-8 years now, we have two things that we've developed at EY that work in this. One is, it's called Nightfall, and it's a layer 2 zero knowledge for privacy optimistic rollup. So it allows for transfers and payments under privacy on top of either public Ethereum or Polygon.
Okay.
The second thing that we've developed is something called Starlight.
Okay.
Starlight isn't a layer 2 network. It's a programming transpiler. So what you can do is you take a regular Solidity smart contract that you might deploy on Ethereum, and you can go through it and you mark up the things that you would like kept private, and then it will recompile the contract as a zero knowledge circuit where you can keep all those transactions fully private. And it kind of functions like a little black box. You put stuff in and stuff comes out, but there's no way for anybody on the outside to see the rules that went into it. And then the next step is for us to tie a Starlight contract together with a Nightfall transaction so that you can have private business logic that's encapsulated just between you and me, but all the transfers and payments can happen in this big privacy pool where I can take a widget from one supplier and a widget from another supplier, which might be governed by two separate business agreements, and then tie them together into a new product, which I in turn sell to somebody else. And that's why it's so, if your head is sort of like, oh, that's really complicated, it is. Like, this is one of the hardest things was, we spent several years figuring out how to do privacy, but people who are really good at understanding the deep, deep math of privacy don't have the 20 years of enterprise software and supply chain experience that I do. And so I would one of the struggles was sometimes I'd explain like, hey, this is how companies transacted with each other. And they're like, oh, we can't do that. I'm like, we got to think about how we do this. And eventually we ended up with these two pieces and the ability to connect them to maximize the privacy in the system.
Right. Sounds very complex. Serious question. Starlight and Nightfall, where did these names come from? I mean, I'm seeing kind of like a pattern with planets here.
Yeah, so we have Starlight, Nightfall, Starfall. It started with Nightfall because it provides kind of the privacy of nighttime on business transactions. And then we're like, well, when the sun sets, what happens? The stars come out. And then Starfall ended up being is actually the name of the tool that we use to connect the two together. So I personally am waiting. We've thought of a couple of others that are eventually coming down the pike. One's called Midnight, which eventually will make the transactions like extra private. And then eventually I have reserved the name Event Horizon. For whenever we find out what perfect privacy is, we're going to call it Event Horizon.
Okay. Well, I'm excited. So I'm assuming you're working on that now?
We're working on more. Right now, so we're in our third iteration of Nightfall. It's really kind of amazing. Like, we started in 2016 thinking about blockchain privacy. And we showed a prototype of Nightfall in 2018 at DevCon in Prague. And at that time, it cost $100 a transaction, which is totally uneconomic.
Right.
We're now down to like 30 cents on Ethereum and under a penny on Polygon with Nightfall 3.
Okay.
And it's an optimistic rollup. Nightfall 4 will be a ZK rollup, which will be an instantaneous rollup with even lower costs. We're trying to get to, we have a roadmap to about 4 billion transactions a day, which we think would cover maybe one major industry like pharmaceuticals or automotive.
Okay.
We believe that when the entire world sort of moves onto blockchain, which we think will happen eventually, we need to be at a capacity of something on the order of 40 to 60 billion blockchain transactions a day.
Okay.
We can see our way to about 4 billion with the work that we're doing. So scalability and privacy are the two things we're zeroing in on. Scalable privacy, really. But yeah, we need to get to 40 to 60 billion transactions a day in capacity.
Is it expensive for enterprises to use blockchain technology?
I think overall the business case is really good, right? We've been working to drive down the transaction costs. Like, for 30 cents on Ethereum, a financial transaction is totally worth it. If I'm buying, $1,000 worth of stock, no problem. The challenge that we have is we've got clients. I got one client. They want to execute roughly 2 million transactions a day to bring a single product line on chain. 2 million a day, right? So whatever your gas fees are, they better be really low to get to 2 million a day. So that's where, the way I think about it is not like, is it expensive or is it cheap? But the lower we drive the price, the more use cases we enable.
Right. Got it. And gas fees, for our listeners that don't know, that's when you make a transaction on Ethereum, you have to pay to actually ensure that transaction goes through.
Exactly.
And so you want those fees to be low, because if they're too high, nobody's going to want to make transactions.
Right. And I don't know who originally came up with it, but the name gas is so brilliant because just like in the real world, when the price of gas goes up, we care much more about the efficiency of our vehicles. And when the price goes down, we're like, oh, we can all buy big SUVs, right? So what we think about is, as the lower the price of gas, right, the lower the cost of executing a transaction, the more cool use cases we get to unlock and execute.
Right. Definitely. The terminology in blockchain and Web3 is so confusing. And I think that also throws people off because, and like during our conversation, we've thrown out zero knowledge proofs and L2s and gas fees. And
we haven't even talked about mining, which honestly did a number on my head for a long time. I just really... I'm sure, I think people had to explain mining to me like 5 times before I finally got it.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, Paul, there's terms that I still just don't understand. And I've been in the industry for so long. Things are changing so fast in this industry also. By the way, someone told me, is it Web3? Or they asked me, is it Web3 or is it Web 3.0? And the way I write it for Cointelegraph and just write it in general is Web 3. I never say Web 3.0. But then he told me, oh, it's actually, there's a difference between Web 3 and Web 3.0. And then I was kind of shocked, really?
I've never heard that.
I've never heard it either. And so everybody's confused.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so easy to get sucked into all these naming debates. Like, is it a blockchain or is it a distributed ledger?
Right.
Well, I just try to avoid that. I don't really care what it is, right? We're building solutions on Ethereum, and I'm just interested in, okay, can I manage your inventory? Can I track your product? Can we manage your procurement, right? Can we do cross-border trade? Can we arrange payments? Let's focus on the use case. And that's a bit of why I wrote the book was, let's talk about the use cases, and to the maximum extent possible, let's use plain English instead of terminology. So I have a whole chapter on L2s, layer 2s.
Right.
And I explain how they work, what's important about them. And, it's only a few pages long. I have a lot of sort of shorter chapters in here. But it is designed to be this is a book for non-technical people to learn enough to be dangerous, to read and say, okay, I know what an L2 is. I understand why L2s are around, and I understand the different flavors of L2s. I may not have any idea about the underlying math that supports them, but if you say it's an optimistic rollup, I will know what you mean, and I will know the difference between an optimistic rollup and a regular rollup.
Right. Well, that's what I love about your book, and I'm not just saying this because we're here having this conversation. It's really easy to read and to understand, and I'm not technical. And so for me, reading this book is just, honestly, I was in a swimming pool in Dallas a few weeks ago, just reading your book. It's like a pool read. Ethereum for Business is a pool read.
That's going to be the pull quote from the podcast. And it is intended to be an easy read. I haven't had, none of the reviews have come in yet, but I think the first few chapters, I wrote them and I sent them to my publisher, who's not a technical expert, and he's like, I understand stuff I never really understood about this before. He's like, particularly the one he really loved is I have a chapter called "Everything Will Be Tokenized."
Oh, I think I remember that one.
And he's like, I get it now. I understand what the value proposition is.
Right, definitely. What else should we know about the book? What was your favorite chapter? How long did it take you to write the book? Why did you write the book? Like, just random questions.
Yeah. So I wrote this book. I mean, I've been explaining Ethereum to people for a long time. So in many ways, this is the compendium of all of my explanations, right? All of the things last year was kind of an interesting story. What happened is a big famous publishing company came to me and said, "Hey, we would love for you to write a book on Ethereum." I said, "That sounds awesome." I kind of I didn't realize that I wanted to do this, but I think I do. It would be great. They sent me the contract and I was like, "Oh, holy cow, right? This is insane. This contract is completely unreasonable." And I was like, "Can we negotiate?" And they're like, "No, we don't negotiate." I was kind of bummed. Mm-hmm. And I gotten excited and I was like, I can't sign. I don't even want to, it's a joke when I say they were going to take the film rights, but they were going to take everything. And I was kind of bummed, and I called this lady I know. She's absolutely brilliant. You should have her on your podcast sometime. Professor Mary Lassity at the University of Arkansas. I don't think there's been anybody in academia who's been working on enterprise blockchain for longer than her. And this lady,
wow.
She knocks out a book a year.
Oh my gosh.
So I called her and like Professor Lassity, I'm kind of bummed. I didn't really realize that I wanted to do this, but I kind of do. So if I want to actually write a book, how would I do that? Uh-huh. And she's like, "Oh, the Walton Business School at the University of Arkansas will publish your book," right?
Oh, awesome.
She's like, "I've worked with you for a while. I think you might know what you're talking about." So the book is published by Epic Books, which is part of the University of Arkansas, and they're specifically kind of an imprint of the Sam Walton Business School. And Professor Lassie there runs an incredibly top-notch program. So they're like, "Yeah, you can do this, and I get to keep the copyright. I have the film rights. I don't yet know who wants to make a film out of this, and I have set it up so that all the profits from the book go to Gitcoin." So So that's a little bit of the backstory of the book. The book comes in, it's got 3 sections to it. The first is, how does Ethereum work? Plain English explanation, smart contracts, wallets, tokens, distributed ledger, etc. Second section is about, I counted it the other day, it's 17 specific use cases. Payments, carbon tokenization, inventory, procurement. If you're a business person, you're like, "Can I do this?" It's in here, right? And then the third section is what I'd call the advanced topics. And this is things like tokenomics. People are always generating these bizarre economic models. How do you think about them, or how do I try to think about them? And it's not a perfect explanation. Audits. We're an audit firm. And this, by the way, is definitely not an audit textbook. But so much stuff in this industry, people are running around I'm audited by. You are not. What you're calling it, so much of what people are calling audited, verified, etc. None of those things, right? And then a little bit on carbon footprint. Mm-hmm. Why would anybody do a private blockchain? Is there ever a good reason for doing it? Spoiler alert, the answer is no. Proof of work, proof of stake, mining, what's the big deal?
Defining that.
Defining it, what it is, how it works, what the difference is. So, hopefully people love it. I really enjoyed writing it. It took me about 4 months.
Wow. That's not so long.
No, it's pretty fast.
That's good.
It's one of those things everybody will recognize as pattern. Slow, fast, slow. So the first 3 chapters, really agonizingly slow. And I sent them to my publisher, and I had no idea what to expect. He came back. He's like, "Yeah, these are great. Uh-huh. You can definitely do this." So then, the next 20 chapters, fast. Once you get confidence, mm-hmm. and then there's a slow part, which is when you come back, you have to clean things up. You got everybody that you talk about, every single company, every case example in this book. I sent the draft of the case example to the company in question, right? Or one of my favorites is I talk a little bit about MakerDAO.
Okay, right.
So I posted my draft of the discussion of MakerDAO in the MakerDAO forums and got a mountain of comments, right? Smart comments, interesting comments, right? By the way, huge testament to the quality of the MakerDAO community, right? But there's all the fact checking, verification, et cetera, to try to do a proper job of that. And that was kind of the slow, hard part.
Right. I know all about that. Writing articles, you've got to fact check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's so old-fashioned. We're a couple of old-fashioned fact-checking articles. How silly of us.
We want to be accurate, Paul. We don't want to, lead people on this wrong path of blockchain. And the book I love it because you do have that accuracy in it. And like I said, for me, it's a pool read. Really, I was just at the pool reading the book because it's so easy to read. It's not complicated at all. Ethereum for Business is an easy read. You make it easy.
Thank you. And by the way, I want to say that is an especially valuable compliment because it comes from somebody whose profession is writing. I'm not a professional writer, so that is really high praise, and I thank you for that.
Yeah.
There's one other thing I want to talk about. I was thinking about this over the weekend. I was reading the book, and I was like, you know what? I wonder what people are going to say when they first start putting in their reviews on various websites about the book. And I feel like one of the things they're going to definitely say is, Paul, you said this book isn't an advertisement for EY, but
right.
3/4 of the examples in here, maybe more, are from EY. Are you being disingenuous? And the answer is no. And I thought about this and I realized EY is basically at this time, we're the only firm that's actually building software to do business on public Ethereum. Mm-hmm. And because this book is about Ethereum, not blockchains in general or private blockchains, right? We needed real Ethereum examples. I really hope that in time for the second edition, I will have more non-EY examples. Mm-hmm. But I also kind of hope that our competition doesn't really figure this out until it's much too late for them. So, maybe we won't.
Yeah. Well, we have to wait and see. I do think that Web3 and blockchain technology is becoming more advanced and more mature. We've been in the industry for a while and we've seen the space mature, and we're only going to continue to see the space mature. So people are going to jump on that and they're going to start learning about it. But obviously EY is leading the way. So that's great.
I hope we will stay that way. I hope, 20 years from now, people will think about all those private blockchains the way we now talk about pets.com. Do you remember pets.com? Do you remember Cosmo.com? Right? People are going to be like, oh, do you remember private blockchains? Do you remember that was a huge phase? And they'll be like, yeah, thank goodness EY is the biggest player in the business now.
Right.
That's my fantasy in 10 years.
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing, Paul. We're going to wrap things up because we're running low on time. And I mean, we could talk forever because there are so many questions I want to ask you, but we can do a follow-up interview.
That would be delightful.
Yeah. So if our audience, our listeners want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
So blockchain.ey.com is the official EY website for blockchain. There's a contact us form there. I'm at P. Brody on Twitter, and I'm Paul.Brody at ey.com at work.
Great. And then if they want to buy your book, is it on
pretty
Amazon?
much anywhere books are sold. Walmart.com, cool. Amazon.com. Just Google it. It's available. And if you love it, please leave a good review. And if you don't, please send me a direct email. I do. I want the publisher already told me that there's going to be a second edition. So whatever we do, we would like to improve it.
Cool. Thanks so much, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you.